The first time I encountered humans, I thought I understood fear. I was wrong. Terror, as it turned out, was something entirely different from what my species had experienced in our comfortable existence within the Galactic Federation. My name is Zephyrian Class 779, though humans would later call me Zeph for reasons that still confuse me. I belong to the Ethereal Collective, a species that evolved on gas giant moons where the greatest dangers came from atmospheric storms and gravitational fluctuations. We are tall, translucent beings with elongated limbs and minds capable of processing vast amounts of data simultaneously. We prided ourselves on being logical, rational, and above the primitive emotions that plagued lesser species. The Federation had just made contact with a species called humans from a death world they named Earth. The preliminary reports were fascinating yet concerning. These creatures had evolved on a planet where everything seemed designed to kill them. Predators with massive teeth, weather patterns that could level cities, diseases that could wipe out populations, and, most disturbing of all, they fought wars against their own kind with weapons of unimaginable destruction. As a xenobiologist specializing in aggressive species integration, I was assigned to the first diplomatic mission to Earth. My job was to assess whether humans could be safely integrated into Federation society or if they posed too great a threat. The Federation had dealt with warrior species before. The Krillian Empire was known for their military prowess, and the Decian Dominion had conquered half their home galaxy before joining us. But something about the human reports felt different. The journey to Earth took 3 standard cycles aboard the Federation flagship Harmony's Dawn. During this time, I studied every piece of data we had collected about humans. Their planet was classified as a Class 12 Death World, a rating so high that only 2 other known worlds in the galaxy had received it. Most sapient species evolved on Class 3 or Class 4 worlds at most. What struck me most was not just the lethality of their environment, but how humans had not merely survived it. They had conquered it. They had eliminated most of their natural predators, learned to predict and prepare for natural disasters, and had even begun terraforming other worlds in their system. This was unprecedented. Most species that evolved on death worlds either went extinct or remained trapped on their home worlds, too specialized for their harsh environment to expand elsewhere. The human delegation met us at the edge of their solar system. 3 ships approached our massive vessel, and I was immediately struck by their design philosophy. Where Federation ships were elegant, flowing constructs that worked in harmony with space, human ships looked like they were built for war. Angular, armored, bristling with weapon systems that our preliminary scans couldn't fully identify. They moved with an aggressive efficiency that made my translator implant struggle to find appropriate words. "Welcome to the Sol system," came the transmission from the lead human vessel. The voice was calm, professional, but there was something underneath it that made my exoskeleton tingle with unease. "We're honored to host the Federation's diplomatic mission. Please follow our escort to Earth." Captain Morvain, a seasoned Altarian who had successfully negotiated with dozens of species, seemed confident as always. "Standard first contact protocol," he announced to the crew. "We maintain diplomatic courtesy while gathering intelligence. Remember, these humans are a young species. They've barely achieved faster-than-light travel. We have 3,000 years of galactic diplomacy experience. I should have paid more attention to the way the human ships moved as they guided us through their system. There was no wasted motion, no unnecessary maneuvering. They flew like predators, alert, efficient, ready to strike at any moment. But I was too focused on my instruments, cataloging everything I could about this strange species. Earth itself was beautiful in a way that made no sense. How could a death world produce such stunning blue oceans, white clouds, and green continents? It looked peaceful, serene even. The orbital stations around it were massive, clearly designed for both commerce and defense. As we approached, I noticed that every station had weapon ports that tracked our movement. Not threateningly, but with the casual awareness of a species that assumed every stranger might be an enemy. The human delegation that greeted us at Earth's primary orbital station was led by Ambassador Sarah Chun, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. She was accompanied by a security detail and various advisors, all of whom seemed remarkably calm for a species meeting aliens for the first time. "Welcome to Earth," Ambassador Chun said as we gathered in the station's main conference room. The space was designed to accommodate various alien physiologies, with adjustable gravity and atmospheric controls. "We've been looking forward to this meeting ever since we received the Federation's first transmission." Captain Morvain began the standard diplomatic proceedings, offering gifts of art and technology as tokens of friendship. The humans reciprocated with items from their own culture, music, literature, examples of their craftsmanship. Everything seemed normal, civilized, exactly what I had expected from a first contact scenario. Then, Ambassador Chun mentioned the tour. "We'd like to show you some of our cities, give you a feel for human civilization," she said. "Perhaps start with Geneva, where our global government meets, then visit a few cultural centers. We want you to understand who we are as a people." It seemed reasonable. Every species wanted to show off their achievements to potential allies. I prepared my recording equipment and cultural analysis protocols. This was exactly the kind of opportunity one needed to assess human society. The shuttle ride to Geneva was my first real exposure to human pilots. The crew of two, a man named Jackson and a woman called Rivera, handled the atmospheric entry with casual precision that was disturbing to observe. They joked with each other, discussed their plans for the weekend, and navigated through storm systems that would have challenged our best pilots, all without seeming to pay much attention. "Bit of turbulence coming up," Jackson announced as we hit a weather front that sent our shuttle bouncing like a leaf in a hurricane. My fellow diplomats gripped their restraints in terror, but the humans just continued their conversation about something called football scores. Geneva was beautiful, a gleaming city nestled between mountains and a pristine lake. The buildings rose in elegant spirals, parks, and gardens integrated throughout the urban landscape. It looked peaceful, advanced, exactly what I expected from a spacefaring civilization. But then I started noticing details that made my analytical mind uneasy. Every building had reinforced construction that seemed far beyond what was necessary for local weather. The windows were not just glass, but complex, transparent materials that my scanner identified as blast-resistant. The underground transportation system was clearly designed to double as emergency shelter, with blast doors and independent life support systems. "Your architecture is quite robust," I commented to our guide, a cheerful young man named David who worked for the Earth government's xenological division. "Oh, that's just building code," David replied with a shrug. "After the last few wars, we decided it was better to be prepared. You never know when you might need to shelter the population quickly." Wars. The casual way he mentioned wars made my translator implant struggle. In Federation space, wars were historical curiosities, diplomatic failures from less civilized times. But David spoke about them like weather patterns, unpleasant but inevitable aspects of existence that one simply plan around. The tour of the government complex was enlightening in ways that made me increasingly uncomfortable. The humans had built their global government center like a fortress. The building itself was beautiful, with flowing architecture and artistic elements that spoke to a sophisticated aesthetic sense. But beneath the beauty was a structure designed to withstand attacks that would level most Federation buildings. The architectural style is called defensive elegance, David explained as we walked through corridors lined with art and sculptures. "We believe that beautiful spaces are important for the human spirit, but we also believe in practical preparedness." Ambassador Chun joined us for lunch in the complex's dining facility. The food was excellent, carefully prepared to be safe for various alien physiologies. But I found myself more interested in observing the humans around us. Government workers, military personnel, civilian contractors, They all moved with an alertness that I was beginning to recognize as distinctly human. "Tell me about your military," Captain Morvain asked during the meal. It was a standard diplomatic inquiry. Every species had some form of defense force. Ambassador Chen's smile remained warm, but something shifted in her eyes. "We maintain defensive capabilities appropriate to our needs," she said carefully. "Perhaps General Morrison can give you more specific information." General Morrison was introduced as the head of Earth's Planetary Defense Force. He was a compact man with gray hair and eyes that seemed to catalog everything around him. When he shook hands with Captain Morvain, I noticed the way his grip lingered just a moment longer than necessary, as if he was testing something. "Our military doctrine is built around the principle that the best defense is comprehensive preparedness," General Morrison explained. "We maintain forces capable of protecting Earth and our colonies from any conceivable threat." "Any threat?" I asked, genuinely curious. "What sort of enemies do you prepare for?" The general's smile was polite but cold. "Any threat, Professor Zeff. Natural disasters, hostile alien invasion, civil unrest, terrorism, conventional warfare, weapons of mass destruction, cyber attacks, biological warfare, economic warfare, and several scenarios that are classified." The casual way he listed those threats made my exoskeleton feel cold. Most Federation species worried about asteroid impacts or solar flares. Humans apparently prepared for everything up to and including their own extinction. "That seems like a rather pessimistic worldview," Captain Morvain observed diplomatically. "We prefer to call it realistic," Ambassador Chen interjected. "Human history has taught us that hope for the best while preparing for the worst is the most effective survival strategy." After lunch, David took us to what he called a cultural center in downtown Geneva. It was a magnificent building that housed museums, theaters, art galleries, and educational facilities. Children were everywhere, laughing and playing and learning. It should have been a reassuring sight. Any species that invested so heavily in their young was usually peaceful and stable. But I kept noticing things that didn't fit. The museum security was far more sophisticated than seemed necessary for protecting artifacts. The building's evacuation procedures were posted everywhere, detailed enough to handle multiple emergency scenarios simultaneously. Most disturbing of all, many of the historical exhibits dealt with warfare, catastrophe, and survival against impossible odds. One exhibit that particularly caught my attention was titled "The Human Response to Existential Crisis." It detailed how humans had survived ice ages, volcanic catastrophes, pandemics, and nuclear warfare. But it wasn't just a historical record. It was clearly educational material designed to teach current generations how to recognize and respond to similar threats. "Your people have faced remarkable challenges," I commented to David as we stood before a display showing human adaptation to climate change. "Every generation faces new ones," he replied matter-of-factly. "That's why we study the past so carefully. The specific threats change, but the principles of survival remain constant." "And what are those principles?" I asked, my scientific curiosity overriding my growing unease. David's expression grew serious for a moment. "Never give up. Never surrender. Adapt to any environment. Fight any enemy. Protect your people no matter the cost. And always be prepared for things to get worse." That evening, we were invited to attend what Ambassador Chan described as a cultural celebration, a concert featuring human music in one of Geneva's great halls. The venue was beautiful, with perfect acoustics and elegant design. But as I took my seat among the audience of humans, I began to experience something I had never felt before. It wasn't the music that disturbed me, though it was strange in its raw emotional power. It wasn't the venue, despite its hidden defensive capabilities. It was the humans themselves. Sitting among them, I finally understood what I had been sensing all day. These weren't just survivors of a death world. They were predators who had evolved alongside other predators so dangerous that they had been forced to become the ultimate predator in order to survive. Every human in that concert hall was a descendant of beings who had fought and killed and survived in an environment so hostile that it would have wiped out my entire species in a single generation. They sat peacefully, enjoying their music, but underneath that civilized exterior was something that made every instinct I'd scream warnings. They were killers. Not because they chose to be, but because anything that wasn't a killer had been eliminated from their gene pool millions of years ago. As the concert progressed, I found myself studying the faces around me. Parents holding children, elderly couples sharing quiet moments, young people lost in the music. They all looked so normal, so peaceful. But I could see it now, the alertness that never quite disappeared, the way their eyes occasionally swept their surroundings, the unconscious body language of beings who were always ready for fight or flight. During intermission, a young woman sitting next to me struck up a conversation. Her name was Maria, and she was a teacher who worked with refugee children from human colonies that had faced various disasters. She spoke passionately about her work, her love for her students, her hopes for humanity's future among the stars. "Do you have children of your own?" she asked me. "My species reproduces differently," I explained. "We create offspring through collective mental energy focused into crystalline matrices. The process requires the participation of the entire community." "That sounds beautiful," Maria said with genuine warmth. "Very peaceful." "Yes," I agreed. "We have been fortunate to evolve in a relatively safe environment." Maria's expression grew thoughtful. "I can't imagine that," she said quietly. "Safety has always been something we've had to fight for. Even now, with all our technology and preparation, we know it's temporary. Something will always be trying to kill us. Natural disasters, hostile aliens, our own mistakes. The best we can do is be ready. Doesn't that make life terrifying?" I asked. Maria smiled, and for a moment I saw something in her eyes that made my translator implant shut down completely. It wasn't madness or bloodlust. It was worse. It was the absolute certainty of someone who had looked into the abyss and decided to stare it down. "Terror is just another emotion to manage," she said simply. "You feel it, acknowledge it, and then you do what needs to be done anyway." When the concert ended, I excused myself and stepped outside into the Geneva evening. The city was beautiful under the stars, peaceful and serene. But now I could see the truth beneath the surface. This wasn't a civilization built on peace and prosperity. This was a fortress disguised as a garden, populated by warriors disguised as civilians. And tomorrow, Captain Morvain wanted to visit their military installations. I spent that night in my quarters aboard our shuttle, staring out at the city lights and trying to process what I had learned. My preliminary assessment was already complete, though the mission was scheduled to continue for another week. These humans were not like any species we had encountered before. They weren't conquerors like the Krillian Empire, who sought to dominate others through superior technology and tactics. They weren't warriors like the Cian Dominion, who viewed combat as an art form and fought for honor and glory. Humans were something far more dangerous. They were survivors from a world that had tried to kill them every single day for millions of years. And they had not just survived, they had thrived, they had adapted, they had become something that could look at any threat in the universe and calmly begin planning how to defeat it. As I prepare my initial report for the Federation Council, I struggled to find words that could convey what I had discovered. How do you explain to peaceful species that we had just made contact with beings who were evolutionarily designed to be unkillable? The next morning brought new revelations that would make this first day seem like a pleasant introduction to the reality of human nature. But as I tried to sleep that night, one thought kept echoing through my mind. I had thought I understood fear. I had been wrong. Real fear, I was beginning to learn, was realizing that you were standing among a species that had survived everything the universe could throw at them and had decided that survival wasn't enough. They wanted to thrive, and they had the capability to ensure that nothing in the universe would ever stop them. The second day began with what Ambassador Chen cheerfully described as a technical demonstration at the Colorado Aerospace Defense Complex. Captain Morvain seemed pleased with the opportunity to observe human military capabilities firsthand. I was beginning to suspect that our diplomatic mission was heading toward revelations that would fundamentally change how the Federation viewed this new species. The flight to Colorado took us over vast stretches of human agricultural land. From the air, Earth looked peaceful and well-managed. Geometric fields stretched to the horizon, dotted with cities that seemed to grow organically from the landscape. But my enhanced sensors were picking up details that continued the pattern of defensive preparation I had noticed in Geneva. "Those aren't just farms," I observed to David, our ever-present guide. "You're very observant," he replied with what I was learning to recognize as the human tendency toward understatement. Most of our agricultural areas serve dual purposes: food production and strategic resource management. Every farming community is also a potential fallback position. Fallback position for what? David's expression remained pleasant, but his eyes grew serious. For whatever comes next. The Colorado complex was built into a mountain, its exterior so perfectly camouflaged that we would have flown directly over it without noticing if our human escort hadn't pointed it out. As our shuttle descended toward the hidden landing pad, I could see defensive installations that made Geneva's preparations look modest by comparison. "Welcome to Cheyenne Mountain," General Morrison greeted us as we disembarked. "This facility has been protecting North America for over a century. We've made some improvements since the early days." The entrance was a massive blast door that could withstand what my instruments indicated was a direct nuclear strike. As we passed through multiple security checkpoints, each more sophisticated than the last, I began to understand that we weren't just visiting a military base. We were being allowed inside one of humanity's most secure installations. "Why are you showing us this?" Captain Morvain asked as we walked through corridors carved directly from living rock. "Because we want you to understand who we are," General Morrison replied. "Not just what we are, but who we choose to be." This facility represents human defensive philosophy in its purest form. The first stop was what they called the Threat Assessment Center. It was a vast room filled with displays showing real-time data from across human space and beyond. Operators monitored everything from asteroid trajectories to alien communication patterns to something labeled existential risk probability matrices. "We track 13,000 potential threat categories," explained Colonel Sarah Webb, the facility's operations director. "Natural disasters, hostile aliens, technological failures, biological warfare, economic warfare, cyber attacks, social breakdown, resource depletion, cosmic phenomena, time paradoxes, dimensional incursions, artificial intelligence rebellion, and unknown unknowns." "Unknown unknowns?" I asked, my translator struggling with the concept. "Threats we haven't thought of yet," Colonel Webb replied matter-of-factly. "We dedicate significant resources to imagining new ways the universe might try to kill us." The monitoring systems were staggering in their complexity. Humans were tracking the movement of every ship within 50 light-years of Earth, analyzing communication patterns for signs of hostility, and running constant simulations of various disaster scenarios. But what disturbed me most was how routine it all seemed to the operators. This wasn't emergency preparation. This was normal daily operation. "How do you function with this level of paranoia?" Captain Morvain asked, and I could hear the strain in his voice. General Morrison's expression didn't change. "We prefer the term comprehensive situational awareness. And it's not paranoia if they're actually out to get you." "But who is they?" I pressed. "You've only been in space for a few decades. You haven't encountered any hostile aliens." The general's smile was cold and sharp. Yet, our next stop was the Strategic Response Planning Center. Here, teams of humans worked around the clock, developing response plans for every conceivable threat. The complexity was overwhelming. They had detailed protocols for everything from first contact scenarios to dimensional warfare. "Show them Protocol 77 Alpha," General Morrison instructed one of the planners. The woman, a major whose nameplate read Chin, apparently a common human surname, pulled up a holographic display that made my exoskeleton go cold. It was a complete invasion scenario involving a hostile alien force with technology approximately equivalent to the Federation's standard defensive capabilities. This protocol outlines human response to invasion by a technologically superior alien force. Major Chun explained as the display showed tactical formations, resource allocation strategies, and evacuation procedures. We assume standard superiority in space-based warfare, advanced energy weapons, and coordinated assault doctrine. The detail was incredible. They had analyzed Federation military technology from our peaceful diplomatic ships and extrapolated potential combat applications. More disturbingly, they had developed countermeasures, theoretical countermeasures that looked disturbingly practical. This is purely theoretical, of course, Major Chen continued. But our doctrine requires us to be prepared for any eventuality. How long did it take you to develop this? I asked, though I suspected I didn't want to know the answer. We had preliminary versions ready within 6 hours of receiving your first transmission, she replied. We've been refining it ever since. 6 hours. They had received humanity's first contact with an alien civilization and, within 6 hours, had developed plans for fighting a war against us. Captain Morvain was studying the display with growing alarm. These countermeasures, some of them might actually work. We certainly hope so, General Morrison said pleasantly, though we obviously prefer peaceful cooperation. The tour continued to what they called the Applied Research Division. Here, human scientists were working on projects that defied easy categorization. Weapons that could disrupt faster-than-light drives. Defensive systems that could protect planets from antimatter bombardment. Communication technologies that could function even during dimensional warfare. We're particularly excited about this one, said Dr. Elizabeth Park, the chief researcher, as she showed us something called a reality anchor. It's designed to prevent localized space-time manipulation. Very useful if someone tries to weaponize black holes or temporal paradoxes. The casual way she mentioned weaponizing black holes made my translator implant emit a small distress signal. Has anyone actually attempted to weaponize black holes? Captain Morvain asked weakly. Not yet, Dr. Park replied cheerfully. But the math suggests it's possible, so we're developing countermeasures proactively. We were then taken to what General Morrison called the real demonstration. This turned out to be a combat simulation involving human military forces facing various theoretical alien threats. The scenario was played out in a massive holographic arena, with real human soldiers manning realistic combat stations. This is Exercise Omega-7, General Morrison explained as the simulation began. Defensive response to invasion by technologically superior alien force with energy weapons, personal shielding, and coordinated battle doctrine. What followed was 20 minutes of the most precisely executed violence I had ever witnessed. The human forces faced simulated aliens with technology clearly superior to their own. They should have been overwhelmed in minutes. Instead, they won. They won through tactics so ruthlessly effective that I found myself instinctively moving away from the human soldiers around me. They used terrain, deception, improvised weapons, and strategies that bordered on the psychotic. When their advanced weapons failed, they fell back to projectile weapons. When those failed, they used explosives. When those failed, they used their vehicles as missiles. When those failed, they fought hand-to-hand with entrenching tools and rocks. But it wasn't the violence that terrified me. It was the way they thought. Every time the simulated aliens gained an advantage, the humans immediately began adapting. They learned from every defeat, incorporated every lesson, and transformed their failures into new tactical advantages. Impressive, Captain Morvain said, though his voice was strained. Your soldiers are quite adaptable. These aren't our best soldiers, General Morrison replied matter-of-factly. This is a standard infantry unit with 6 weeks of basic training. Our elite forces are considerably more capable. After the simulation, We were taken to the facility's historical archives. Here, humans kept detailed records of every conflict they had ever fought, every disaster they had survived, every enemy they had defeated. The scope was staggering: thousands of years of warfare, survival, and adaptation. We study our past because it informs our future, explained Dr. James Wright, the chief archivist. Every conflict teaches us something new about survival and adaptation. The records were organized not just chronologically, but by threat type, tactical application, and strategic lessons learned. They had detailed analyses of biological warfare dating back thousands of years, siege tactics that had been refined through centuries of practice, and psychological warfare techniques that made my exoskeleton feel cold. "This one might interest you, Dr. Wright said, pulling up a display titled Asymmetric Warfare Against Technologically Superior Opponents. We've had considerable experience fighting enemies with better weapons and technology. The display showed conflict after conflict where humans had faced superior forces and found ways to win anyway. They didn't just adapt to disadvantage. They turned it into advantage. When they couldn't match their enemy's technology, they attacked their supply lines. When they couldn't win through conventional tactics, they used unconventional ones. When they couldn't win through violence, they used economics, psychology, or simple persistence. The key insight, Dr. Wright explained, is that technological superiority can be overcome through tactical flexibility, strategic patience, and operational persistence. Superior technology often creates predictable tactical patterns. We study those patterns and develop countermeasures. What if your enemies also adapt? I asked, fascinated despite my growing terror. Dr. Wright's smile was genuinely enthusiastic. Then, we get to test our meta-adaptation protocols. Your what? Strategies for adapting to enemies who are adapting to our adaptations. He explained as if this was the most natural thing in the galaxy. We've developed 17 different meta-tactical frameworks for evolutionary arms races. The final stop on our tour was what they called the Strategic Philosophy Center. This turned out to be a room where humans sat around thinking about warfare. Not current conflicts or immediate threats, but the fundamental nature of conflict itself. We're working on something we call universal defensive theory, explained Dr. Amanda Torres, the center's director. The goal is to develop strategic and tactical frameworks that will remain effective regardless of technological advancement, environmental factors, or enemy capabilities. How is that possible? Captain Morvain asked. By focusing on constants rather than variables, Dr. Torres replied. Technology changes, but mathematics doesn't. Weapons evolve, but physics remains the same. Tactics adapt, but psychology is relatively stable. She showed us what they had developed so far. It was a unified theory of conflict that treated warfare as a fundamental aspect of existence, like gravity or thermodynamics. They had reduced every possible conflict to basic principles that could be applied regardless of the specific circumstances. For example, Dr. Torres continued, any entity attempting to harm humanity will have resources, objectives, and limitations. Our strategic framework focuses on identifying and exploiting those limitations regardless of what specific form they take. What if an enemy has no limitations? I asked. Then, we create limitations for them, she replied simply. As we prepared to leave the facility, General Morrison gathered our group for what he called a final briefing. We met in a conference room decorated with symbols and artifacts from thousands of years of human military history. I want to be very clear about something. He began, his tone serious, but not hostile. Everything you've seen today represents our defensive capabilities. We're not an aggressive species. We have no interest in conquest, domination, or territorial expansion beyond what we need for our own survival and growth. He paused, letting that sink in. However, we are also not a passive species. We have learned through long experience that the universe is not a safe place. We prepare for threats not because we want to fight, but because we want to survive. And we will take any action necessary to ensure the survival of humanity and our allies. Captain Morvain nodded diplomatically. We understand your position, General. The Federation has no hostile intentions toward humanity. I know, General Morrison replied. Our analysis of Federation military capabilities suggests that you are indeed a peaceful alliance of civilized species. But analysis also suggests that there are other forces in the galaxy that are not so benevolent. He activated a holographic display showing the galactic map. Red markers indicated known hostile forces, yellow markers showed potential threats, and green markers represented allied civilizations. We've identified at least 37 civilizations within Federation space that show indicators of potential aggression, he continued. We've also detected signs of at least 3 major threat groups operating outside Federation territory. And our deep space monitoring has identified anomalous signals suggesting the presence of entities that don't match any known species profile. The display zoomed in on specific regions, showing detailed threat assessments for civilizations I recognized as long-standing Federation members. The analysis was thorough, accurate, and deeply disturbing. How did you gather this intelligence? I asked. We've been monitoring galactic communications since we achieved faster-than-light travel, General Morrison replied. We also have a very good understanding of historical conflict patterns. Peaceful civilizations like the Federation tend to create power vacuums that attract predatory species. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Humans hadn't just been preparing to defend themselves from us. They had been analyzing the entire galactic political structure, identifying threats, and developing strategies to protect not just humanity, but potentially the entire Federation. Are you offering to defend us? Captain Morvain asked quietly. General Morrison's smile was warm, but his eyes remained cold. We're offering to be allies, Captain. Real allies. The kind who will stand with you when the universe gets ugly. That night, as I sat in my quarters reviewing the day's recordings, I realized that my understanding of human nature had undergone another fundamental shift. They weren't just survivors or predators. They were guardians. Guardians who had looked at the galaxy and decided that peace was worth fighting for, that civilization was worth protecting, and that survival required not just individual strength but collective defense. But the most terrifying realization was yet to come. As I studied their tactical databases and strategic frameworks, I began to understand that everything I had seen, all their preparations, all their weapons, all their careful planning, was based on one fundamental assumption. Humans believed that something was coming, something worse than anything the galaxy had yet seen. And they were preparing not just to survive it, but to protect everyone else from it. I spent the night wondering what they knew that we didn't, and hoping that whatever it was, they were wrong. The third day brought an invitation that would forever change my understanding of what it meant to be human. Ambassador Chen contacted us early in the morning with an unusual request. We'd like to show you something that we don't typically share with first contact delegations, she said, her usual diplomatic smile replaced by an expression of serious consideration. But given your mission to assess humanity's compatibility with Federation membership, we believe you need to see who we really are. Captain Morvain accepted immediately, though I could see the tension in his movements. The previous day's revelations had shaken him badly. He was beginning to understand, as I was, that humanity represented something unprecedented in galactic civilization. Our destination was a facility called Deep Ice Station, in what humans called Antarctica. The continent was a frozen wasteland that reminded me painfully of my homeworld's harshest regions. But where my people had built elegant spires that worked in harmony with the environment, humans had constructed a research installation that looked like it was prepared for siege warfare. Deep Ice Station is our primary research facility for what we call existential studies, explained Dr. Sarah Kim, the station director, as our shuttle descended through a blizzard that would have grounded any sensible aircraft. We study threats that could potentially end not just human civilization, but all life in the galaxy. The station itself was built into the ice and rock its surface installations barely visible above the frozen landscape. As we landed, I could see defensive systems that were becoming familiar. Weapons that could target orbital threats, shields that could protect against energy bombardment, and communication systems that could function even during a complete electromagnetic shutdown. But there was something else here. Something that made my exoskeleton feel cold in ways that had nothing to do with the temperature. Before we go inside, I need to warn you about what you're going to see, Dr. Kim said as we gathered in the airlock. Some of the research here can be disturbing. We study worst-case scenarios not because we're pessimistic, but because understanding the worst possibilities is the only way to prevent them. The first laboratory we visited was devoted to what they called extinction event modeling. Teams of human scientists were running simulations of various ways that life in the galaxy could be completely destroyed. Not just damaged or set back, but permanently ended. We've identified 47 distinct categories of existential threat, explained Dr. Michael Chun, the lead researcher. Gamma-ray bursts, false vacuum decay, artificial intelligence rebellion, gray goo scenarios, quantum vacuum collapse, temporal paradoxes, dimensional intrusion, cosmopredator entities, and several others that we keep classified. The simulations were incredibly detailed. They showed galaxy-wide extinction events playing out across millions of years, with variables for different technological levels, defensive preparations, and survival strategies. What made them particularly disturbing was how thorough they were. These weren't just academic exercises, they were practical planning tools. The goal is to identify early warning signs and develop intervention strategies, Dr. Chun continued. For most extinction scenarios, the key is detection and response time. If you can identify a threat early enough and respond appropriately, even apparently unsurvivable events can be mitigated or prevented. You really believe you can prevent extinction events? Captain Morvain asked, his voice strained. We have to believe it, Dr. Chen replied simply, because the alternative is accepting that everything we care about will eventually be destroyed. The next laboratory was even more disturbing. Here, humans were studying something they called hostile intelligence scenarios. These were detailed analyses of how sufficiently advanced hostile entities might attack or subvert galactic civilization. We assume that any entity capable of threatening galactic civilization will be significantly more intelligent than us, explained Dr. Lisa Park, the project leader. This creates unique defensive challenges. How do you fight an enemy that can outthink you? Their solution was typically human. They had developed what they called anti-intelligence warfare. Instead of trying to match superior intelligence, they focused on creating situations where intelligence became a disadvantage. Superior intelligence often creates predictable patterns. Dr. Park explained as she showed us tactical frameworks that made my translator implant struggle. Highly intelligent entities tend toward optimization, efficiency, and logical consistency. These tendencies can be exploited. The specific methods they had developed were terrifying in their elegance. Ways to turn an enemy's intelligence against itself, to create scenarios where the optimal solution was actually a trap, to force superintelligent entities into making mistakes through carefully constructed logical paradoxes. Have you actually tested these methods? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. We've run extensive simulations against our own artificial intelligence systems, Dr. Park replied. The results are promising. Our next stop was what they called the Deep History Project. Here, human researchers were studying galactic history, looking for patterns that might indicate previous extinction events or hostile activities. The galaxy is 13 billion years old, explained Dr. James Wright, whom I recognize from the previous day's archives. Statistical analysis suggests that intelligent life should be far more common than we observe. This suggests either that intelligence is much rarer than we calculate, or that something has been systematically removing it. The data they had compiled was extensive and deeply troubling. They had identified numerous anomalies in galactic development that suggested large-scale interventions by unknown entities. Star systems that had been mysteriously sterilized, civilizations that had vanished without trace, and patterns of development that seem to indicate external manipulation. We call it the cosmic Gardner hypothesis, Dr. Wright continued. Something has been maintaining the galaxy in a specific state for millions of years, preventing the development of advanced civilizations, eliminating threats to the existing order, and ensuring that nothing emerges that could challenge whatever established that order. You think something is actively preventing galactic civilization from advancing? Captain Morvain asked. We think something has been actively managing galactic development, Dr. Wright corrected. The Federation's current level of technology and social organization represents an optimal balance from a management perspective. Advanced enough to be useful, not advanced enough to be threatening. The implications were staggering. If humans were correct, then the Federation wasn't a natural development of galactic civilization. We were a managed system, kept at a specific level of advancement by entities unknown. But that would mean, I began, that something has been controlling galactic development for millions of years, Dr. Wright finished, and that the recent emergence of humanity represents an uncontrolled variable in that system. The final laboratory was the most disturbing of all. Here, humans were preparing for what they called asymmetric extinction warfare. The premise was simple and terrifying. If something was trying to destroy all life in the galaxy, how would you fight back? Traditional warfare assumes that you're fighting for territory, resources, or political control, explained Dr. Amanda Torres, whom I remembered from the Strategic Philosophy Center. Extinction warfare is different. You're fighting for the right of existence itself. The strategies they had developed abandoned every conventional approach to conflict. Instead of trying to defeat their enemies, they focused on ensuring that life would continue regardless of what happened to current civilizations. They had designed self-replicating systems that could restart civilization from scratch, hidden archives that could survive any conceivable disaster, and dispersal protocols that could spread life throughout the galaxy faster than any extinction event could eliminate it. The key insight is that extinction warfare is ultimately about time, Dr. Torres explained. Any entity trying to eliminate all life has to find and destroy every possible source of life in the galaxy. We just have to make sure that something survives and rebuilds. You're planning to sacrifice current civilizations to ensure future ones. I asked, horrified. We're planning to ensure that there will be future ones, she corrected. If that means sacrificing current civilizations, including our own, then yes. Life itself is more important than any specific manifestation of life. The casual way she discussed the potential sacrifice of entire civilizations made my exoskeleton go completely cold. These humans weren't just prepared to die for their principles. They were prepared to make other species die for those principles. But the most disturbing revelation was yet to come. There's one more thing we need to show you, Ambassador Chan said, as we prepare to leave the facility. The reason we brought you here. She led us to a secure communications chamber deep in the station's core. Here, banks of monitoring equipment tracked signals from across the galaxy and beyond. The technology was more advanced than anything I'd seen in Federation space. 3 months ago, our deep space monitoring arrays detected something, she said, activating a display that showed the galactic map with new markers I hadn't seen before. Multiple signals indicating coordinated movement of massive objects in the galactic void. Objects that don't match any known celestial phenomena. The display zoomed in on specific regions outside the galaxy's spiral arms. Their moving in precise formation were contacts that registered as artificial constructs. Massive artificial constructs. We estimate them to be approximately 50,000 kilometers in diameter, Ambassador Chun continued. They're moving at approximately 1/10 light speed, following trajectories that will bring them into contact with the galaxy's outer rim in approximately 200 years. What are they? Captain Morvain asked, though his voice suggested he suspected the answer. We don't know, Ambassador Chun replied. But they're not natural phenomena They're not Federation technology, and they're not any technology we've encountered in our galactic surveys. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Something was approaching the galaxy. Something massive, artificial, and unknown. And humans had detected it before anyone else. "How long have you known?" I asked. "We've been tracking anomalous signals for 6 months," Ambassador Chen replied. "We confirmed artificial origin 3 months ago. We've been preparing response protocols ever since." "Response protocols for what?" Ambassador Chen's expression was grave. "For the possibility that whatever is approaching represents the entity or entities that have been managing galactic development for millions of years, and that our emergence as a spacefaring species has triggered some kind of response." She activated another display showing human preparations. It was staggering in scope. They were building fleets of ships designed for conflicts unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They were developing weapons that could function against enemies with unknown capabilities. They were creating defensive systems that could protect entire solar systems from assault. "We've been trying to convince the Federation Council to begin similar preparations," Ambassador Chen continued. "But they don't believe the threat is real. Because they can't see it," I realized. "Because they don't want to see it," she corrected. "The Federation has invested 3,000 years in building a stable, peaceful civilization. The idea that something is coming to destroy it is too threatening to acknowledge." Captain Morvain was studying the displays with growing alarm. "What do you want from us?" "We want you to help us convince the Federation that this threat is real," Ambassador Chen replied. "And we want you to help us prepare a unified defense." "And if the Federation refuses?" Ambassador Chen's expression grew cold. "Then we'll prepare to defend them whether they want us to or not." That night, I sat in my quarters reviewing everything I had learned over the past 3 days. My assessment of humanity had undergone multiple fundamental revisions, each more disturbing than the last. They were not just survivors or predators or guardians. They were something entirely unprecedented in galactic civilization. They were a species that had looked at the universe and decided that existence itself was worth fighting for. Not just their own existence, but the existence of life itself. They had evolved on a world that had tried to kill them every day for millions of years. They had survived ice ages, volcanic catastrophes, pandemics, wars, and disasters that would have eliminated most species. But instead of just adapting to survive, they had adapted to protect. They were prepared to fight enemies they had never seen, using weapons they had never tested to protect people who didn't believe they needed protection. They were willing to sacrifice their own civilization to ensure that civilization itself continued. They had looked at the cosmos and decided that the universe needed guardians, and they had appointed themselves to that role. But the most terrifying realization was that they might be right. If their analysis was correct, then something had indeed been managing galactic development for millions of years. The Federation's peaceful civilization might be nothing more than a carefully maintained zoo. And something was approaching that might represent the zookeepers deciding that their experiment was over. I spent that night working on my final report for the Federation Council. The recommendation was clear, though I doubted it would be accepted. Humanity should not just be granted Federation membership. They should be put in charge of Federation defense. Because I had finally learned what real fear was. It wasn't being threatened by predators or disasters or enemies. Real fear was realizing that you had been living in an illusion of safety, and that illusion was about to be shattered. Real fear was understanding that the universe was not safe, had never been safe, and that the only reason any of us were still alive was because we hadn't yet attracted the attention of the things that lived in the dark between the stars. Real fear was standing among humans and realizing that they were the only species in the galaxy that had looked into that darkness and decided to fight back. And real fear was knowing that they were probably humanity's only hope for survival. 3 days with humans had taught me that there were worse things than death. There was the extinction of everything you had ever cared about. There was the end of hope, of growth, of possibility. But I had also learned that there were things worth fighting for, even if the fight seemed hopeless. Standing among humans, I had learned what real fear was. But I had also learned what real courage looked like. And for the first time since leaving my homeworld, I felt something I had never experienced before. I felt hope that we might actually survive whatever was coming. Because humans would never stop fighting, never stop adapting, never stop protecting the things they cared about. And now they cared about us.